based in India, and he runs an organization called Swadeshi Jagran Manch. This is SS affiliate and one of the very powerful think tanks in India. So Mr. Alistair Newton is was very senior diplomat in UK, and now he runs a business advisory firm. And these days he's spending his time in Zambia, doing some projects there. Mr. Ai Chung Lai uh, is head of an organization called Prospect Foundation, and plus he is also leading a DPP's think tank on various issues related to strategy as well as their foreign relations. And he is an expert on Taiwanese view on China, and he has spent his life in US as well as Taiwan, understanding these subjects. We are just waiting for Mr. Bakshi to join, and then we can begin with the discussions. People who want to hear the conversation would join in the time to come.
Unless you want to check with Mr. Bakshi once on his WhatsApp so that.
वही कर
Ji, thank you.
Just give me 2 minutes.
Anilesh is joining in. I'm admitting him now. Anilesh, Mr. Bakshi has joined. You want to call him once and he's joined?
Hi, Mr. Bakshi.
Hi.
Hi, welcome.
Please.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we already have your co-panelist, Mr. Ai Chung Lai. He is leading a think tank in Taiwan, the Prospect Foundation, and he has an expertise and a deeper understanding of foreign policy of Taiwan, especially vis-a-vis China. He spent his life in US as well as in other parts of the world understanding this. Then we have Mr. Alistair Newton. He is a former diplomat in UK and an expert on the Asian economies as well as on the US. and understand the nuances very deeply. We also have with us Dr. Ashwini Mahajan. He is an India-based economist. Uh, he runs an organization called Swadeshi Jagran Manch, which is an RSS affiliate, and he is a very strong voice. Uh, he's a very strong voice. When we call about indigenous revivalism, and he is a nationalist by ideology, and he's pushing various government policies towards self-reliance and moving away from dependency on China. Plus, he also comments regularly on the strategic affairs vis-a-vis China. Uh, we have a regret from Mr. Ahluwalia, who is an Indian parliamentarian and a very senior BJP leader. He developed conjunctivitis in his eyes, so he's not been able to concentrate on screen. So he just a few minutes before we had to start, he had conveyed us that he won't be able to join. So on his behalf, I'm apologizing. But he was telling me that he'll be listening to many of the points which we would be discussing, and maybe in a future discourse we would be hearing his thoughts as well. So I welcome you all in this wonderful discussion, which I'm sure would excite everybody. Um, I'm very thankful to Mr. Bakshi that he took out his time and joined us. It's very late in New Zealand, but he has come in. Sir, I'll assure you this discussion would be very rejuvenating one. Uh, so to build up this context, we have seen that the global order on China is actually now shifting away. There is a consensus which people have developed that the existing world order is not inclusive enough. It's not taking us towards development of last man standing in the queue. It has already created a wider gap between haves and have-nots. Secondly, it is also becoming very dangerous, on strategic point of view, as China is still in the era of expansionism, where they want to expand their areas of influence not only in the seas as well as on the land. On land, we have seen their incursions in Indian part of Ladakh, where their armies, they have crossed into the no man's land and created tension between the world's one of the two biggest countries, if we call by population size. But we have also seen that in the last 2 decades, China has also tried to shift not only the businesses towards China, but they have also started exerting their influence on the multilaterals. They have extended their influence on WTO. They have extended their influence towards United Nations. They have extended their influence towards World Health Organization. This is the latest which we are seeing that the WHO is also falling into that the surplus money they have. Plus, we are also seeing that globally they are extending the debt trap towards emerging economies. We have seen it, they are doing it in Asia, they are doing it in Africa. I'm sure Mr. Newton must be, witnessing many of their debt traps in Zambia and other parts of Africa where he's executing projects. So, there is a thinking which is going on, especially in the last 6 months, that, are we getting into a world which is peaceful for our kids, world which is prosperous and full of opportunities for our kids, and what sort of changes, we need to make. And this brings us to this discussion where, we wanted to understand from you all that, what is the global order right now? Are we in a position to challenge it? Are we in a position to build a discourse where equitable opportunities can come for emerging economies as well as for the Western world? Can we make the world more equitable? So I welcome you all, and I'm very, very keen to hear all of you. Uh, Maybe we can begin with somebody like Ai Chung Lai, whose country is battling, Chinese for last so many years, and they have not only grown but they have also become inspiration for the world. Mr. Lai, the mic is yours. You can start with your remarks, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for having me in this truly global forum. I saw the participants from UK, from Taiwan, from India, from New Zealand. So this is truly global and encompass several time zones. So it's a congratulate for the organizers about the effort they put in. I think I'll just talk about the focus on China itself. Of course, there are a lot of the issues globally when we talk about the Chinese right now.
Instead of this,
China
you have little
is a global power, yes. But when we talk about the China as a global power, I think it is important to see how the China, especially leadership, see themselves and their role in this world. In about for the last 150 years, the traditional indoctrination about the Chinese is that the China was the center of the whole world and was the strongest country in the whole world. But then in the last 150 years, China was colonized and has been very badly treated by the Western powers. So the older China in the last 150 years and now, what they wanted to do is to regain their central position they believe they once occupied now in as the center of the world and the strongest country in the whole world. So this is the basically the whole thinking behind the Chinese and especially this leadership. Interestingly enough, that in the last 30 or 40 years, what we saw as a very dramatic increase of the Chinese economic development and associated with the national comprehensive power development, the China actually benefited from the kind of international order that China was in. But then China always argued that it is a very unfair treatment toward them about this international order, so that the China always wanted to change it. And so that's when you started to see about the Chinese leadership, when they talk about several things and in the encounters, like in year 2012, when Xi Jinping visited the United States, he first came out with a new type of big power relationship. At that time, he said that he wanted to reset the U.S.-China relations, and also hinted that probably about the concept of two, the concept of the China and the United States on the Asia and probably even the whole world was something that in the making and as part of the suggestions. Of course, that kind of formula hasn't really been received as very positive by the United States. But then the whole thing about how the China is not just competing and also catching up with the United States, but actually to regain the dominant position it once has in the whole Asia is still very much in the Chinese leadership mind, especially for the Xi Jinping. So that we started to see after the proposition about the China-U.S. new type of big power relations, and the year 2013, China proposed a kind of One Belt One Road, which to many experts in the beginning was perceived to be an economic project as to outsource or the export Chinese overcapacities. But then as the project moves forward, we started to see that what China did was actually, along with those overcapacities problem, China also through this project to extend its overall overseas influences, so that we started to see the kind of the debt trap to trap a lot of countries, including several countries in the Indian Ocean rig adjacent to the India. And so basically that becomes a tool for China to extend its strategic influence. And now with many of the countries who, if you look at those projects economically, is basically unbeneficial. And economically that cannot be sustainable. but China continued to use the whole national resources to support it and to sponsor and endorse the whole project and continue going. So basically, so this means that China has its strategic and objective in mind about those One Belt One Road project. And also, when we talk about the Chinese leadership and what Chinese thinkings, yes, as I earlier just said, the leadership in generally believed that the China wanted to regain the kind of central position it wants to occupy in Asia. But for the Xi Jinping himself, the whole thing is more. It's just more than. It's much more than that. It's not just about the regain the so-called past glory, which basically is a nationalistic aspiration. It's also about to regain and to re-glorify the Communist Party's dominance as well as its own position in the whole world. So we started to see not just about Xi Jinping, his emphasis about domestically that the Chinese Communist Party need to be dominated in every aspect of the Chinese society and in Chinese the Chinese people's life, but also he wanted to push forward about the kind of the governance model that the Communist Party was able to exercise on the Chinese people as a perfect model to extend to other parts of the whole world. And if you look at the way that the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi earlier during the march, when she responded to various press reports regarding Chinese reaction toward the COVID-19, and one of the common theme he always emphasized is that China has the advantage because Chinese has the kind of all country system that gave the Chinese government model the advantage over the democracy, so that China is in a better position to respond to the COVID-19, the kind of pandemic or the kind of the national disaster, the kind of problem that it has. And so by saying this, basically that reflecting how the Xi Jinping himself believed the superiority of the Chinese communist system, and also the superiority about the Chinese government model, and also the kind of the competition vis-a-vis democracy in a global scale. So that brings up another issue. In addition to the nationalistic aspiration of the Chinese leadership, the Xi Jinping is basically a brand that he wanted to expand it and glorify the whole Communist Party's position in China and also in the whole world. And so to a certain extent, he sort of the right to replay the kind of the Soviet Union style the competition vis-a-vis the United States. Although right now a lot of people they look at the whole Trump administration as believing that right now the U.S.-China competition, part of it is actually came from the U.S. Recognition about the competition vis-a-vis China. But how this pushed to the global scale has something to do with the Xi Jinping, his own personal belief, how the Communist Party, how this ideology and how this governance system is so superior that the democracy cannot compete, and how the China needs to push forward about those. Now, another issue about it is that when we talk about the Chinese leadership, Xi Jinping is in a very different league vis-a-vis the so-called Hu Jintao and Jiang Zemin, and also the Deng Xiaoping. Although Xi Jinping, everybody right now focus on his position, like he grabbed all the power together. But if you look at Xi Jinping, he's thinking about the China and how he believed the China should be, and the kind of government style he wanted to emulate. Basically, he really despite what the Deng Xiaoping does. And he does not treat both the Hu Jintao and the Jiang Zemin as a legitimate governor of China. The differences, the central differences was that Xi Jinping, coming from the princelings, as the second generation of the founding generation of the PRC, Xi Jinping he has a kind of concept, or that is also true with many of the princelings, that they are the owners of China. And to a certain extent that the Hu Jintao and Jiang Zemin, they are basically manager of this China. So differences in terms of mentality. That I'm the owner, I'm the son of this owner, so I'm the rightful heir of this country, and the Hu Jintao and the Jiang Zemin, they are just basically a manager. So makes it that Xi Jinping, he believed that he can change many of the governing style and the models or the consensus that had been set up by the Deng Xiaoping. And Xi Jinping, he believed that going back to the Mao Zedong era and the kind of the revolutionary development, along with the Chinese power that accumulated and trying to bring back China to the central position, and also to reposition Communist Party as the dominant source as well as the power, and to achieve the kind of historical achievement where the Communist Party and with Xi Jinping was able to bring China back to its position 150 years ago. That is sort of the define what Xi Jinping is thinking and doing. So that in the China-India context, I think in this regard, that China believed that it will prevent India from emerging at all costs. This is my view. So that although the India is also rising, I think not just about India rise, but many of the Asian countries also rises. But what China see is that the only country that have the legitimacy to be rising to the kind of dominance is only China, and the rest of them, they are just a secondary. So that I think it is important to know that how the China is seeing the development and seeing how the current international system in the past, where it was helpful for Chinese rise, China has always been very reluctant to accept that. But China wasn't as strong to resist that, so China just take its time. But now, with a stronger position that China is occupied, China believed that it can come out and say and reorganize the whole world in its own wishes. So I just stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lai. You have given us a great deep dive into the Chinese and Taiwanese politics, and we probably understand China now much more. Thank you for your insight. But if I could bring Mr. Newton here, so one of the aspects which Mr. Lai was underlying was the surplus capacities which China has built up over the years. And many of those capacities are being built by many of the Taiwanese investors themselves. We understand that many of Taiwanese, they have invested in mainland China, and they have built up the capacities. But over period of time, we all understand that China has now big capacities, and their products are being flooded into the global markets, in the US, in the EU. Even in Africa and the other markets, even in India, we are battling with these type of things. Do you think that this type of economics is helping them to win over more allies and win over many of the European friends, if I could say, and that is also helping them in although everybody is criticizing their designs, but they still want to be friendly with them. Do you think that this phenomena is still there in the Western world?
First of all, many thanks for inviting me to participate in this event. And thank you very much to Ai-Chung Lai, with whom I largely agree over his analysis on China and where it stands today. But let me add a couple of additional points to that, and in particular, looking to your question. There has been a lot of talk over the last 3 years or so since Donald Trump was elected president about the trade wars between China and the US. Frankly, I think anything to do with trading goods, to which your question was significantly referring, but not entirely, is actually a bit of a sideshow. A really important battle right now between China and the US in terms of material goods is actually the technology war, with Taiwan, if I may say so, Mr. Lai, caught firmly in the middle of that technology war and in danger, to quote a saying from my part of the world, of being the grass which is crushed when the elephants dance. Now, clearly this is a hugely important issue. Huawei is in the news all the time. We have more news coming out of the US about the technology war. where is the real issue? The real issue here, in my view, is that Xi Jinping has been very fortunate to come to power and to want to change the direction of China, or perhaps the pace would be a better word, at a time when the West is deeply divided for any number of reasons. And this isn't just about the US and the European Union. It's also about the UK, another member of the P5, a member of the G7, a member of the G20, and no longer a member of the European Union. So what Xi Jinping has seen, looking at the world at large, is divisions between countries in the West, but also major divisions within societies in the West, which have helped to inculcate those divisions between countries. Clearly, whichever way one looks at it, 42% of Americans still approve of Donald Trump's performances, despite COVID-19, despite the state of the US economy today. 42%. That's just over 4% short of what he needed to win the election in 2016. Similarly, in the UK, we have polarization in society. We saw a Polish presidential election last weekend, which was split virtually 50-50 between a right-winger and a liberal candidate. This is happening all over the place, and Xi Jinping has been able to exploit this, and he will continue to exploit it if he can. The rise of nationalism is more or less universal. It is not just a Chinese phenomenon. And to be fair, to put this in context, if we look at the long run of history, i.e. 3 millennium, it's exactly what one would expect at this stage in the geopolitical cycle, i.e. at the moment when we have a rising power, China in particular in this case, and a relatively declining power. And we could go on to talk about Thucydides' trap, and maybe we'll come back to that later. But I want to put that to one side for the moment and concentrate on your question per se. A huge amount of how quickly China can continue its advance actually depends on the outcome of the US election. If Donald Trump is re-elected in November, we are going to see 4 more years of pretty much what we've been seeing for the last 3.5 years, a very business-like attitude to other powers in the sense of doing deals, and an America which wishes to go it alone and is not interested in maintaining alliances except possibly with countries, economies, let me be careful how I phrase this, like Taiwan, which clearly does have a certain amount of influence in Washington still, unlike, say, traditional allies like Germany or France. So the alternative, of course, looks like it is Joe Biden. The best thing that Joe Biden can do, in my view, in terms of pushing back against Xi Jinping's China policy, is to mend fences with Europe and other traditional allies, to build a stronger relationship with countries like India than Donald Trump is likely to. Let's keep in mind that Donald Trump has declined to allow the general system of preferences to be renewed between the US and India. He has had cause, he thinks, to speak against India on a number of occasions. Right now, India is on good terms with Donald Trump, but there's no guarantee that things will remain that way going forward. He is not a dependable ally by any means. Biden gets elected, he needs to mend fences. He needs to build coalitions to push back against China, not in the sense of containment, which you tend to hear from some right-wing Republicans, even to this day. Robert Blackwell, the former US ambassador in New Delhi, being a classic example of an advocate of containment of China, but in the sense of actually imposing some sort of disciplines on China. United Front in the World Trade Organization against China's questionable trade practices. United Front on technology. We've seen some efforts on that recently from the US in the case of Huawei, which have had an impact on some countries, but not all countries. So I do think the outcome of the US election is very, very critical indeed. And if I can just go back to China for a moment, we also need to ask, how sustainable is Xi Jinping's governance model in China? Now, I could say a few words about that, but I think it's better that I actually leave that to Mr. Lai, who may care to come back to it at some point. My own view is that in the medium term, by which I mean 10 to 20 years, Xi Jinping's model is probably not sustainable. probably not sustainable. Societies evolve, economies evolve, China is evolving constantly. Of course, predicting collapse is a very risky business indeed, and I'm not predicting collapse. But I do think when it comes down to it, that Deng Xiaoping was actually right back in the mid-90s when he envisioned that China's economic growth would inevitably lead to a demand from Chinese society for more political rights. The question that bothered Deng Xiaoping at the time was how could those rights be given and the Communist Party of China remain in power? And Xi Jinping has rightly decided, probably, that there is no guarantee that more political rights could be given to China's people and the Communist Party remain in power. But taking people's rights off them is no guarantee of the Communist Party being able to remain in power either. So we mustn't forget, amid all of the talk about China's tensions outside China with other countries, that there are also tensions within China and that those could grow in the foreseeable future. I'm going to give you one specific example, a very recent one. Xi Jinping has rightly been able to hold up the way in which the US, the world's leading democracy supposedly, has mismanaged COVID-19. And the numbers continue to speak loudly in favor of the arguments which Xi Jinping puts forward about the Chinese government's model being superior to the Western government's model. But let's keep in mind at the same time that two countries, two economies very close to China, both democracies, South Korea and Taiwan, have both outperformed virtually every other country in the world except New Zealand as far as the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic has been concerned. So it's not the democratic model which has failed in America over COVID-19. It's questions about the competence of the particular administration there which are at stake. So I do think that in the end, democracy will be powerful, democracy will prevail even in China. And on that note, I'm going to finish by saying just this. India's greatest saving grace is that since 1948, it has continued to grow and grow more powerful economically and politically as a democracy. I was in India for the election last year. I saw democracy in practice there. It remains a deeply impressive facet of Indian society. Makes life more difficult for the politicians, for sure. Makes life more difficult in international relations. But India should never forget that one of the great strengths it has relative to China is democracy. It is not a weakness.
Thank you, Mr. Newton. It's a great, wonderful insight you have provided us, and probably given us an opportunity to crystal gaze if Mr. Joe Biden manages to win the U.S. polls, and how things would be. It's still very early in the day to predict that which way the politics in US will go, but for sure that this would have a deeper impact on the global order, which way the American electorates move, whichever way, whether it goes towards backing Mr. Donald Trump's policies, or they want to change and bring in Joe Biden. So only time will tell us, and if things go as they are moving in. So maybe later on, later by November, we'll be able to see the better picture. Here, may I now bring in our guest from Down Under, Mr. Bakshi, Kamaljeet Bakshi. He's member of Parliament there, and he'll be hitting the elections very soon there. And I'm sure the relationship with China would be one of the election issues there as well. China has made deeper investments, not only in New Zealand, but also in Australia. In Australia, they are also capturing the natural resources and building up their capacities there. Mr. Bakshi, tell us, your experiences now. We all are seeing that Indo-Pacific region is boiling up. America is bringing in their warships there. Then 4 of your countries, one of your neighbors, Australia, Japan, India, and US. We would be doing the naval exercises in the Pacific, in the Indian Ocean. Uh, there would be tension, and there is already tension brewing up in the South China Sea, where Taiwan, South Korea, Vietnam, Malaysia, they all are feeling tense that probably their waters are not secure. So, what is the sentiment in New Zealand? When this pandemic has hit the global humanity, what is the sentiment like in New Zealand?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank FII for giving me the opportunity to participate in this international forum. And I would like to thank Mr. Lee as well as Mr. Newton for their insight and very in-depth analysis how the things are presently around the world. Uh, China has created an influence and putting a lot of investment, capital investment all around the globe. And particularly if you look at the Pacific, they have put a lot of money in Fiji, Samoa, New Ireland, Takalawa, all these small little islands. China is putting a lot of investment in the infrastructure over there, extending them loan at very low rate and procuring a lot of food products from there. Like they have been buying a lot of dairy farms in New Zealand and Australia. They have bought fishing rights in Fiji, Samoa. Their boats are coming, catching the fish and exporting back to China, and then processing and then sending back to the Pacific countries to sell them the same fish which has been caught in Pacific Ocean. So these are some of the things which are of big concern, and we should not forget that China has been securing a lot of natural resources all around the world, whether it is Asia, Australia, New Zealand, Pacific, in particular Africa. They have put a lot of investment over there. They are putting up the railway lines. They are securing the ports around the world, whether it is in Sri Lanka, in Australia, and Pakistan. We have seen that they have put in a lot of investment in those areas. And we have talked about the surpluses they are producing and then over flooding the markets around the globe. That is another issue which we need to address. And we need to find out the alternates where the technology can be used and provided to the smaller players in Asia and get better production line. Because what has happened that everyone has moved their production line to China, whereas there are opportunities for the other players like India, Vietnam, Cambodia, where a lot of these kind of investments can be made, better production at cheaper price can be produced. But these opportunities has not been taken, but a lot of investment has gone to China. So these are some of the things which we need to understand and discuss at these kind of forums, how we can divert the investment from China to other parts of the world so that we don't have all the eggs in one basket, but we have spread out our eggs to different baskets and we can have consistent and as well as secured supply chain available for other countries to have the parts to produce high-tech products. So in this manner, there are some issues which are being raised at the political level because as it has been mentioned that in September we are going to have a general election and both the parties, we do understand that China is a very important player for us because a lot of our products are being exported to China. Our trade from 2008, if we compare, it was about $3 billion, and we are around $25 billion in 2020. And in next 2 years, we are hoping that this will be increased to 25 30 years. So that shows that there is a lot of potential for us, and the bilateral trade has to increase. Similarly, the case is for every
Just a
other
second,
country.
Mr. Bakshi. Just a second. There is a noise which is from Canadian. Organizers, please participant on mute, please. It's creating disturbance. Sorry, they muted my mic as well. Mr. Bakshi, you can unmute yourself in the.
Yeah.
Please, I'm sorry for this disturbance.
No, that's all right. So that's where we need to discuss how we can tackle this biggest problem. And as Mr. Newton mentioned about the US elections, that will have huge impact on every aspect of trade with China and other parts of the world. So from the New Zealand perspective, yes, we have got a lot of issues, and we are talking to the political. It has become a political football from both the parties, and I hope that very soon both the parties will come up with some of solutions, what they feel like, how we can tackle these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bakshi. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Nilesh, you'll have to unmute yourself. You're still muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Bakshi, for your insights. This is the dilemma which most of the economies across the world are also going through. And this is probably the model which of late, the globalization has taken, and the China became, the overpowering entity into it. And they took best of the advantages, and they have already controlled the global trade, as you were mentioning, that they have controlled natural resources. They have, you were mentioning the Pacific experience. In India, also we have witnessed a similar tendency where iron ore goes to China, and then they process it and sends back the processed steel, and they are dumping those steel with cheaper prices and killing our steel industry as well. So in a way, we are giving them the resources, and in return, our own steel industry is getting a hit. So this is the dilemma which we also are facing. And one of the forces in India, Dr. Ashwini Mahajan, he's stalling many of these things. Dr. Mahajan, if you want to add in and tell us your thoughts on this changing global order, and if you can also help Mr. Bakshi, with some ideas which he can probably implement in his country and create more jobs and value for his own people. Dr. Mahajan, mic is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Nileshji, for giving me this opportunity, and I welcome Mr. Newton, Mr. Ai Ching Lee, and especially Mr. Kamalji Singhji Bakshi. I'm very glad to be the part of this dialogue on this issue. I would like to go deep into the history of the last 20 years. In fact, if you want to understand the China's rise and the decline of industry all over the world, US, Europe, Latin American countries, Australia, New Zealand, everywhere, we must look at the last 20 years. I find that in 2001, India's trade deficit with China was hardly $0.2 billion, which is 1/5 of the $1 billion. And by 2017-18, it rose up to $63.2 billion. And this was the period. I find all the countries were facing the same trajectory in trade. The imports from China were rising, and these countries were hardly exporting anything except, as Mr. Bakshi rightly mentioned, the raw material. And ultimately, China became the manufacturing hub, the global factory of the world. And this has given enormous power to China in terms of the foreign exchange reserves which they started building up. If we see about a few years ago, China's foreign exchange reserves had crossed $4 trillion, $4,000 billion, and this was the result of the constantly increasing trade surplus of China, which they were trying to build up through unfair trade practices. And perhaps whether it is US or European countries or India or the other Asian countries or Africa or Latin American countries, nobody was really looking at this aggression of China in their trade, and they were subsidizing their exports hugely, and that has led to this situation that they got so much of foreign exchange reserves that they could afford to purchase mines, lands, and strategic positions all over the world. And then came the One Belt, One Road project. And with the help of riding on the huge foreign exchange reserves, they could roll out this huge infrastructure project, and ultimately, as has been mentioned, the China has been able to get a foothold at many of the strategically important ports, strategically important positions in the sea and elsewhere. In the meanwhile, our industries were going down, whether it is, as Anilesh rightly mentioned, about the steel industry has been facing a huge problem because of the dumping by China. One very strategically important industry was API industry. It was producing raw material for our pharmaceutical industry. Our pharmaceutical industry is known for making supplies to around 200 countries, and has been responsible for the public health security for almost the whole world. And that industry also got dependent on China because of the affordability of China to dump any amount of goods, because dumping is a worldwide phenomena. Even uh, every country is dumping their commodities to other countries, but they are limited to one or the other sector. But China had been dumping almost everything to the rest of the world, and that had resulted into this situation in which we are in. And today, when we are talking about having a new global order, uh, which is uh, uh, which is minus China as a major power, we find it very difficult because our dependence on China, whether it is components in the electronic industry or in telecom industry or in a pharmaceutical industry, APIs or in chemicals or elsewhere. So this, I think, situation is almost the same throughout the globe. US, Europe, uh, uh, Australia, uh, New Zealand, everywhere, and uh, uh, and yes, there is election in US this year. Uh, we are also expecting elections in New Zealand and other parts of the world. But fortunate situation is that we are not going to have a general election for the next 4 years, uh, and we have a more stable political regime, uh, which is committed uh, to what I can say. Uh, uh, I I would be not politically right when I say that to teach China a lesson, but I do make use of this phrase several times, being a social organization fighting against China's menace for, uh, in the last about 30 years. What I feel is that the whole world need to unite together. And if some countries are still finding solace in the China's uh, hands, I think they should also think again, because China is a country which is a danger to the world peace, global peace. If we, as Mr. Chang rightly mentioned, that China is suffering from this middle kingdom syndrome, and that is a very big disease which China is suffering from. And I think the whole world has to teach China this lesson, that you remain in your limits. The people of the world, they don't want to destroy China, but at the same time, they should also behave and don't try to destroy, exploit, capture the rest of the world. Uh, if we see their behavior in terms of BRI, as Mr. Chang rightly pointed out, that when this was rolled out, it was seen as a big infrastructure project, but actually it is not. It is a project to index uh, the most vulnerable countries, and we find that today about 10 countries are totally under the debt trap of China, and their strategy has always been to start infrastructure projects which are actually economically not viable, whether it is Hambantota port or any other port which they have been building. They try to build those things which are actually economically not viable, so that the countries are not able to repay their loans, and then they can easily capture them. So I think if really we want to get rid of the China's uh, menace from the world, we need to join hands, forgetting about our personal gains and losses. And, and I am very happy that some parliamentarians have already, from all over the globe, they have already formed a uh, um, some kind of association to fight against this China's menace. And I think more and more people need to join hands. Uh, in the end, I would say that China is undergoing a major problem. Number one, the problem is of their exports. In future, it is not going to be very easy for them to export the way they were exporting. If you look at US, if you look at Europe, if you look at the other parts of the world, they are not going to very easily be exporting goods. We have already made our commitment towards the self-reliant India. Our Prime Minister is very passionate about it. And without really naming the countries, but everybody knows what kind of self-reliance it is going to be. It is a self-reliance free from the China. And already our traders, our businessmen, our manufacturers have already identified the commodities which they can produce themselves very easily, zero technology products, and then even the technology products like telecom and other things. Already we have shown to the world that whether it is PPE kits or ventilators or anything, testing kits, India has not only been able to fulfill its own requirements, but also is ready to export to the rest of the world. A second thing which China is going to suffer is that they have, in other context, Mr. Bakshi was making reference to putting all eggs in one basket. In fact, China in the last few years, in their endeavor to capture the whole world in terms of infrastructure projects, they have already put all their eggs in one basket, that is infrastructure. And the way they are getting, treatment from rest of the world with regard to their BRI project in the last 4 months is something I think which must have been worrying China. So I think in terms of trade, in terms of investments, in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the projects which these Chinese are winning all over the world, in India we have already made a start. And in India we have a stable political regime. I think people of the world, I'm not talking about the governments, people of the world have to rise and give a fitting reply to China for whatever they have done. Thank you. Thank you, Anilesh.
Thank you, Ashwinji. Thank you very much. Thanks for your insights. And many of the things which you have shared with us, we all agree to it. But the thing is that if the world has to be self-reliant without China, there has to be economies like Taiwan. They need to diversify their interests. Maybe out of the mainland China to various economies, Southeast Asia, India, and the other parts. But for that, we also have to see the Western world, becoming more responsible for setting up the new world order, which could be an alternative or which could be, the mainstay. And, maybe Mr. Newton, if you can help us in understanding this, if we take...
In this, I would like to add one thing.
Maybe, Ashwinji, I'll come back to you. There you can make a point. We have also seen 2-3 days back that China promised $400 billion worth investments in Iran. Iran is already undergoing the sanctions from US, and after US pressure, EU has also put in several restrictions. And, in this process, they are pushing Iran to disbalance the power equation which that country has devised for last 2 decades. One of them was India, that they have pushed India out of the railway projects a project which would have connected Gwadar port to Afghanistan, and Afghanistan could have been, a better place to do business had that line be, out of Chinese influence. Because I'm sure now also America would be worried that Afghanistan line, if it's controlled by Iran and China, it would be much difficult and different for them to do business with, in those tracks. So how do you see, these type of instances? Do you think that now the time has come that Western world also need to rethink the way they dealt with, type of countries?
I think we need to get this whole question of decoupling in proportion, and to keep in mind that actually, for sure, China-US is driving a lot of the decoupling sentiment. But as far as the corporate world is concerned, some of this was ongoing in any case. If we consider the impact of the desire of companies to bring manufacturing closer to the consumer, to make tailor-made products rather than off-the-peg products, if we consider the impact of robotics, if we consider the impact which 3D printing is almost certainly going to have on manufacturing processes. Now, for sure, politics is overlaying that big time. But I think it's reinforcing a trend which was there in any case, and that we are going to see a certain amount of economic decoupling being driven by commercial economic considerations and not by political considerations, or indeed by COVID-19, which is clearly going to encourage the regrouping of pharmaceutical industry and other related products for fighting pandemics. The big lesson from COVID-19 is you actually do need to have more domestic capability than was the case in certainly many Western countries when the pandemic first struck. Now, having said that, and to go more to the point of your question, there is a real risk of us finishing up with a world which is divided between the US and its allies and China and its allies, with a whole load of countries in the middle. And here we go back to some of the littoral states in the South China Sea, which were referred to earlier, trying to find a balance between Beijing and Washington and retain that balance, which they've actually been doing reasonably successfully for a significant number of years now, at least the last 10 or 15 years, but which is actually getting a great deal more difficult as US-China relations deteriorate and deteriorate and deteriorate, and particularly complicated by the current regime in Washington, in my view. One of Donald Trump's biggest single mistakes, in my view, was to pull the US out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership 3 days after he was sworn into office. That really allowed China to make big progress in the region which was covered by the TPP, which is most of the Pacific area, actually. Yes, we are going to find that Iran is going to continue to cozy up to China, to go to the specific example which you quoted. Why? Well, mainly because Donald Trump pulled the US out of the JCPOA. And if Biden is elected president and takes America back into the JCPOA, and it won't be easy negotiating a new deal with the Iranians, why would the Iranians trust Washington after Trump pulled out of the JCPOA when Iran was in total compliance with the terms of the agreement it had signed? If he can get a new agreement with the Iranians, then maybe we can move Iran out of China's sphere of influence to a greater extent. But we have to accept that China is going to continue to have a sphere of influence as long as there are countries who are susceptible to influence from Beijing. Now, earlier on, there were a number of references to Africa. As you mentioned at the beginning, I actually live in Zambia, but let me go to another African country. In 2009, I took a party of investors to Rwanda, where we had a meeting with Paul Kagame. And inevitably, one of the investors asked the question about Chinese influence, Chinese investment, debt with China, which have really come very much to the fore of thinking today in a way which is much greater than in 2009, and about corruption in China. And here we get to one of the biggest single problems. You can do business with China in an honest way, in my view, but unfortunately, the leaders in many third world countries, and not only in Africa, choose not to. And although I'm not an unqualified admirer of President Kagame, I would say that he was absolutely right when he said it is up to the leaders of individual African countries to dictate terms to China if they wish to do business in their country. Same applies to European Union countries. It's not just a third world issue. We have to be tougher with China collectively, the nation states of the world, and get them to do business on terms which are in the best interests of our citizens. Not easy, and let me go back to the European Union for this. There is far too much mercantilism still today in the European Union. Lessons have been learned recently to an extent. China's wolf warrior diplomacy has done it no favours at all in China, much as it hasn't in New Zealand, to quote an example of one of our other panelists today. But there is still this overlying thing that China is too big and too important for us not to better do business there. And until we can get over that and say, actually, we're prepared to sacrifice selling into China in order to protect our own interests in the long term, we're going to continue to struggle to counter China's growing sphere of influence in third countries.
Thanks, Mr. Newton. Now may I, bring in Mr. Ai-Chung Lai. Sir, you have seen, the perspectives which are shared by Mr. Newton, Mr. Mahajan, and Mr. Bakshi. How do you see, am I audible? Hello?
I
can hear you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, Mr. Lai, how do you see, these Western economies and India or people in down under should help Taiwan, to have disturbance.
Yes.
So how do you see, they are helping Taiwan, and in reverse, how do you see Taiwan, helping these economies? You have seen that, there are certain.
You're inaudible. I cannot hear you.
Hello, am I audible?
Right now, yes. But earlier, probably I lost some of your questions earlier.
I think there is some problem. Is it okay now?
Yes, I can hear you.
You have heard, these your co-panelists, they have highlighted certain advantages which probably China brings in. One of the advantages that it makes the products so cheap that it helps many of the economies to run basically a low cost economies. Secondly, there are issues related to strategics. Then there are issues related to security, not only in India but in the other parts as well. So how do you see, these economies helping Taiwan, and Taiwan helping them, in many of the issues, like somebody wants to diversify the eggs they have in their basket. How can, Taiwan be part of that story?
Yeah, thank you. I think those are very important questions. Of course, right now is feeding into the bigger issue about how viable and how are you able to do and to the direction about the so-called decoupling, or at least less China, the kind of economy. How is that able to be built? I think I think I agree with the Ambassador Newton earlier when he mentioned about the technology itself. It's already plays some part of it in terms of decoupling. It's not just about U.S.-China decoupling, but probably decoupling also with other countries, that you have to build things closer to the market, and 3D printing and some even data analytic, they're helping with this trend. But I think right now the economy and the manufacture with China, there are certain development. Right now is very different from what we perceive in China like 20 years ago. The first of them is that China is no longer the cheap producers. If you look compare about the benefit or the cost, China, along with the Vietnam and some Southeast Asian countries, even including India, actually made in Vietnam, made in India, they, in terms of cost, is much cheaper than China. So China is no longer the kind of cheap producers that as the driving forces for the world manufacturing. It's no longer like that. But China right now has the advantage that in the past, when the manufacture is in China, so that they started to build out the kind of the manufacturing infrastructures, which like in Shenzhen, where if you are lacking some talents or some critical parts that in need of the very immediate innovations, in Shenzhen, you can easily find some of the talents or the people who probably will be able to help you to solve the questions, but you cannot find those in places like Vietnam, in places like India. So basically, I think right now the China, what is taking advantage, or some of the manufacturers continue to rely on China, is actually about those manufacturing infrastructures that associated with Chinese rice has been built up along those years. And right now, China is thriving on pulling those things together through its social media apps and some of the various interesting service network to help them to do that. So that if you look at the some of the Chinese newly development industry or the newly development innovations, many of them, they are synthesizers rather than the producer itself. Synthesized by having the to be able to put together some of the already available talents and the manufacturers' know-hows that have been hidden in the process, but in China to bring them together. And so this is what I think about that when we talk about the manufacture or supply chain reorganizations. We just cannot talk about some individual company moving out. It has to be the sector by sector. The whole chain of the supply chain need to have a the whole supply chain discussions about where do they want it to move or exactly where you want it to go so that I can still maintain the kind of supply chain. And I think the discussion and the conversation on already started it somehow earlier this year. I saw in Taiwan, the American Institute in Taiwan, and also with Taiwan's major industrial manufacturers. They started to engage in this conversation, and probably they will continue on. And just hope that when we talk about the reorganization, first about supply chain, the kind of the wider scale of supply chain discussion, where a lot of manufacturers, they are engaged in this, they need to talk them out. So it is not some individual companies, their own decision. It has to be a group decisions that to make it available. Now, another thing about it is that when we talk about the future about the economy, I think, of course, it is difficult to really have a full decoupling. But I think for China, that's also because it's so much deeply intertwined with the global economy. So that some of the pressure when the decoupling started to happen will have a tremendous impact on China. So basically, this is also a weakness for them. They are also afraid of decoupling. So I think the issue, instead of thinking about how to make this possible, we also need to think about the process, how this could be the kind of means or the method that the outside world could actually exercise on China to force them to really abide by the rule that they in the past they choose not to abide or they choose to ignore. So this is another issue that we need to think about. Now the third thing about the supply chain reorganization of the economy, the so-called decoupling, is actually on the talents. As I just mentioned earlier in my first point, the talents and the know-how, those are the most important things that for the economy in the future. And it is not just some of the innovation is actually based on the earlier know-how. And that by improvising or the implementing those know-how to make it a newly disruptive innovation that could be very valuable for the future economy or the future technology. So that the kind of talents, especially around the know-how, along with the manufacturing process, which Taiwan has been very good at. But that cannot be taught in school. Those are another very important areas that needs to be focused and think about how this can be standardized and globalized, so that it's not just about some people working in that company or in that manufacturers, they can be benefited, but the others they can also learn from, as long as the intellectual property rights that will be also be respected. So I think in terms of the economy, there are some of the practical steps that also needs to be filled in. First of all, the supply chain global discussions, we haven't seen that. Right now, we only saw some of the discussion for the fear of the consequence of decoupling, but never talk about the process, how that can be possible if we're able to adjust a certain procedure or certain development. And second is actually, I think, about the China itself. China is not the kind of chip products the chip producer it wants to have, so that get rid of that older Chinese image, but know what China is actually very good at and then learn from it, and also how to make that to copy that in a global bigger scale in the outside world. And third, of course, is always to have the talents together. Yeah, I think I'll stop here. And if there are any questions regarding the Xi Jinping, just Ambassador Newton just said, of course, I will happy to respond later on.
I'll come back to you on the PLA as well. Mr. Bakshi, there are certain things which Mr. Lai has underlined. Probably, I provoked him to this question only to get an answer, so that maybe you can take home certain pointers, and where all, alliances can be stitched to diversify, the risk which China poses. Mr. Bakshi? Mr. Bakshi, please unmute yourself.
Nilesh, looks like Mr. Bakshi dropped off. So
I think so. Ashwini ji, you wanted to come in. Mr. Lai has underlined certain points on alliances. So as GM, we all understand that, they always opposed FDI and foreign investments, but they also look for alliances with friendlier countries. So how do you see, many of the proposals which Mr. Lai underlines?
See, yeah, on this very issue, I just wanted to come in because in the last 4 months, there is a lot of churning happening in the global thinking about the global value chains. And we understand that earlier the global value chains used to encircle around China itself, because China being the global factory, most of the countries, the part of the global value chains were linked to China mostly. But in this pandemic and even before that, because of the trade war between China and US, a lot of churning was already happening, and now it is reaching a flashpoint. And I welcome what Mr. Chang has said. In fact, if we see in the last 2-3 months, many of the companies of US, Europe, South Korea, and even Japan and others, they have expressed their desire to relocate from China. And they are finding ways and means and different locations how to really relocate them. Some of the countries are their governments are already helping them to relocate, and this is the time that the countries those who have you know uh, you know left behind in their industrial evolution, in terms of the first, second, third industrial revolution. And India has also been the victim of. Uh, but now we are into the fourth industrial revolution. And I think whole of the globe should take part in that. We as India, we always have been wanting the global well-being, the well-being of the people of all the countries. And now new international coalitions, new uh, types of mm, uh, configurations would now emerge. Uh, India was fortunate enough to drop out of RCEP, so that we are not, going with the uh, baggage of China, taking it along. And therefore, now these countries of Southeast Asia, Europe, US, we can all join hands to build the industrial basis uh, around the world, and make true kind of globalization, where we actually produce those goods which we are good at, not the kind of unfair trade which China has been, indulging in. And I think that will be a win-win situation for all of us. And wherever we have been left behind, like uh, in electronics, in telecoms, uh, wherever we have been left behind, I think these companies, these investments from the other parts of the world can help us build those capacities in India, and they should be, uh, generous enough to accept the conditions of the local contents, so that they create an ecosystem of MSMEs in the country, where I think India can be a good manufacturing hub for solar equipments. We can be good manufacturing hub for electronics and telecom, and we can be a significant and a useful part of the global value chain in that context. I think in this, uh, as I have already said, the countries of the world have to join hands, the governments, their people, and that would be the turning point to make the globe free of the exploitation and expansionism of China. I think that is the point I wanted to make.
Thank you, Ashwiniji. Thank you. When we were uh, reading and discussing things about PLA, one of the things which comes to our mind is that whenever China is in trouble, especially in the last 15 years, PLA started, aggression, not only on the inland borders, neighbors like India and other places, but also, this time around we are seeing that Hong Kong is also seeing, the oppressions, and many of the Hong Kong residents moved to Taiwan recently, and I believe they have also influenced the thought process in Taiwan, that how the oppressors are oppressing Hong Kong and their residents, and probably they are also influencing the Western world. So maybe a one round of deep dive into this. That how do you see this aggression by PLA and the establishment? We have seen it in Ladakh that they try to get into the no man's land. We have seen that how they aggressively crushed the pro-democratic movements in Hong Kong. Maybe Mr. Newton, if you can come in and tell us that how do Western world sees many of these aggressions, and do you think that these aggression and aggressive postures they influence the world order at present?
Yes, is the short answer, but quite to what end remains to be seen. Since you're hosting this from India, let's start with India. Very disappointingly, in my view, and not for the first time, the West has been more or less oblivious to tensions on the China-India border. Doesn't seem to matter what China does there. The West tends to sit there and say, oh, more of the same, it's not going to boil up into anything serious. It was exactly the same with the Dokland crisis 3 years ago. There was a little more attention paid this time because clearly lives were lost. And I guess there was some legitimate cause for distraction in the form of COVID-19. Nevertheless, overall, there is not a lot of interest in that border area outside of India and China itself. And I think this is wrong. There is always, and now I'm going to say something which applies generally to Chinese thrusting diplomacy, for want of a better word, around the region, there is always the risk of a miscalculation. Now, earlier this week, I was reading a paper by George Friedman, an American political analyst from the right wing, very much a favorite with conspiracy theorists. And I would stress I'm not greatly in favor of conspiracy theories myself. George was saying that he felt that Thucydides' trap was simply not an option. It wasn't going to happen. And I think as far as the deliberate move into war is concerned, he's probably right. But I also think he's seriously underestimating the risk of some sort of miscalculation escalating to the point of real seriousness. It could be the India-China border. It could be the South China Sea. My biggest concern, I have to say, remains Taiwan because of Xi Jinping's personal commitment to bring about reunification, which clearly is not going to happen voluntarily as far as the Taiwanese are concerned. And I don't think we should take Xi Jinping's words lightly when it comes to Taiwan. I do think we have potential flashpoints there. Clearly, the US in particular is taking notice over Taiwan, is taking notice over South China Sea. Europeans, no, not really. And I do think that the US, hopefully, and I'm now going to put my political colours firmly to the mast, hopefully under a new president, not because I think Biden will be a great president. I actually don't think he will be a great president, but at least he'd be a president who cares about alliances and isn't devoted to this America first principle that Trump is addicted to, which in practice means America alone. Biden will rebuild alliances with the key Pacific nations, with the key South Asia nations such as India, and of course with the Europeans and the NATO powers, to bring about a united and strong policy on containing China's military aggression. And let's be clear about this. This is no easy task these days. American aircraft carriers, the most clearly visible manifestation of American power since the Second World War, are deeply vulnerable to weapons which the PLA controls today. So we do need to think carefully about how to engage against China in a way which means that China does feel outweighed. That's going to mean more research. It's going to mean that America needs to pull back from this rather foolish policy of denying visas to top Indian scientists and technologists to go to the US and to work there. This sort of policy is ultimately self-defeating. If a united front means anything, it means we have to pool our intellectual capital as well as our physical capital in looking to counter the growing strength of the PLA. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And this becomes very important when, when China is trying to capture the United Nations body on intellectual rights. And we become very, worried that country which violated intellectual properties over the years now want to head that body. Maybe, Mr. Lai, if you can tell us, you must be disappointed with what Mr. Newton was saying, that probably the Western world is not that much sensitive, and they are not as reactive to situation in South China Sea, as well as maybe if I'm not wrong, towards Taiwan as well. So what is your thought that which way PLA is moving? Because the reports which we are reading in the international media, it is suggesting that probably they are also showing the postures against Taiwan. So what is the feeling like? What is happening on your side?
Thank you. I think the the issue about the PLA, first of all, about the Ladakh tragedy and how the PLA sneak attack against the Indian militaries, that really stands out as something that China escalations in the China-Indian borders. Of course, right now we also saw there are a lot of military movements in area close to Taiwan and also in South China Sea. And the United States right now is sending they're sending 2 aircraft carrier battle groups have the exercise in South China Sea, and also we see increasing number of U.S. Jets or ships across the Taiwan area and to respond to the PLA so that for the United States, their attention right now is really on the PLA Navy and its Air Force activities in Taiwan proper, as well as in South China Sea. And I think it is rather they are their reaction toward the Ladakh tragedy, or especially the PLA sneak attack against India, is rather muted. So I think the United States could say more about it and express the disapproval on China as well. But then talk about the PLA's action on the Ladakh. What we saw is actually there are the newspaper in China talk about the action on the Ladakh, the Indian-China border, is actually as a warning toward the Taiwan as well as the other country in South China Sea and also to the United States, as if that China wanted to use this as a lesson, as a warning to both Taiwan and the United States. If that is the case, then I think we probably know how the China side is thinking about India. But another interesting development was that while the Ladakh tragedy that cost 20 Indian soldiers' lives, but there are also the casualty in the Chinese side. And until today, we haven't seen any coverage by China talk about the PLA's casualty there. And so there's a strong sense of the among us that probably China does not want to broadcast these things to avoid the kind of nationalistic demands by the Chinese people on the government that they need to respond to something. Even today, that what we saw is actually there are some private chat room within the Chinese people, in a very small number, trying to know that what exactly happened in the China and Indian border dispute, especially the kind of casualty that happens. But the Chinese officials today, until today, never utter any single words about it. But their action in South China Sea and Taiwan is actually very public, make it known to Taiwan and the United States, as well as Japan and country in this Southeast Asia, about the Chinese intention. So I think when we factor in about the PLA action and also the Chinese officials, their action as a consequence of those, we can clearly see that it seems to us that the China is actually playing the board game where one action is actually sending a political signal to another, in which China believe that this action and the consequence they are able to control. So in this case, it's actually they believe they can control the kind of escalation results in the China-Indian border, but they want to actually send signal to Taiwan, United States in the in Taiwan Strait as well as South China Sea. But I think that also implies that China believes that anything happen in Taiwan proper or in South China Sea vis-a-vis the United States, then it will be very difficult for them to de-escalate. So the kind of the issue about the miscalculation is also something in the Chinese leadership's mind. They wanted to avoid that, avoid being trapped in that situations. So they started to use a different scenario, try to send out political signal. So this is a very interesting development. But finally, I think about the armed forces and the armed conflict across the Taiwan Straits. We believe that right now the possibility is getting much higher than it was before. And we also noticed that there are certain language changes within Chinese higher officials when they are talking about Taiwan. Like in the past, they talk about peaceful unification, but now they only talk about unification and dropping the words about peaceful. So those are the very important implications about what China is thinking about. And right now, the Taiwan and United States is also working very closely, trying to develop a plan to counter this. So to this, I also need to just to say that the Trump administrations, despite the allies' concern about the President Trump himself, Trump administration is actually the first administration really did a lot to respond to the Chinese aggression across the Taiwan Strait. And so I hand you credit to them about what they've done for Taiwan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lai. Probably you are one of those very few, in the room who understands the mind of Xi Jinping probably better than anybody else here. Thanks for sharing your insight. So this was actually a very enriching discussion, but unfortunately we have very limited time, in our hands, and time is our handicap. I really am thankful to you all three, and Mr. Bakshi as well. He dropped off, probably it was very late in the New Zealand, or his connection was not appropriate. But Mr. Lai, you joined us from Taiwan. I'm really thankful to you. Mr. Newton, you have joined us from, I think, from Zambia. You're in Zambia right now. So I'm thankful to you that you joined from there. And Dr. Ashwini Mahajan, I'm really thankful that you could take out the time. So this discussion was done in partnership with Defense Capital, and we will be producing a docket with the magazine. So whenever that is available, I'll share it with you. So that will be taking many of the pointers which you have shared, and will be structuring together in that magazine. Thank you very much. Thanks, gentlemen. Thanks for giving us your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Thanks for taking your time. Thank you, Lieutenant General Bhatia. Thanks, Braj.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Aditya, I'll join you in 2 minutes. Aditya?
Sure.
Just 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I think everybody's on chai time now.
Yeah, we'll just give time for people to log off.
interesting. So it is an
Arvind,
interesting.
just give us 2 minutes, huh? I'm just read this thing off. Just 1 minute.